The void of space stretched infinite and black, punctuated by the ghostly remnants of what had once been the Syntheri battle cruiser Eternal Vengeance. Massive hull plates drifted like wounded pedals, each fragment telling a story of destruction that had become all too familiar in this centuries-long conflict. Captain Krelax of the Sarnak fleet studied the debris field from the command deck of the Razor's Edge, his 4 eyes moving independently. 2 scanning the tactical displays, 2 watching the silent graveyard of space. His exoskeleton, the mottled gray-green carapace that once gleamed with military precision, now bore the dull patina of endless war. 17 cycles of conflict had reduced 2 of the galaxy's most advanced civilizations to hollow shells of their former selves. Confirmed casualty count, his communication officer reported, her voice devoid of emotion. 12,342 Syntheri personnel. No survivors detected. Krelax didn't react. Numbers had long since lost their meaning. 12,000 lives were just another statistic in a war that had consumed entire star systems, reduced thriving civilizations to fragmented remnants, and ground down the spirit of 2 once proud species. The tactical display flickered, a momentary anomaly that would have gone unnoticed by lesser officers. But Krelax had survived this long by paying attention to the smallest details. Sensor anomaly, he growled to his first officer. Triangulate and analyze. Deep within the research vessel horizon, Dr. Elena Rodriguez gripped the navigation console as another wave of quantum instability rocked the ship. Her team of 12, a motley collection of scientists, diplomats, and specialists, were never meant to be here. This was supposed to be a routine long-range exploration mission, a diplomatic survey of uncharted regions far from the known conflict zones. "We're losing quantum stabilization," called out Dr. Marcus Chen, the ship's quantum drive specialist. His fingers danced across holographic interfaces, attempting to maintain some semblance of control. "The wormhole is becoming increasingly unstable." Elena knew the risks. Experimental quantum drive technology was humanity's newest frontier, a method of traversing impossible distances by essentially folding spacetime. But every fold carried inherent dangers, especially when navigating near regions of intense stellar and military activity. The ship lurched again. Warning systems screamed in a cacophony of digital alerts. Outside the view screen, space itself seemed to ripple and bend, reality becoming as malleable as liquid mercury. "Syntheri signatures detected," another crew member announced. "We've drifted into an active war zone." It was the worst possible scenario. Humanity had deliberately maintained a policy of non-involvement in the Sarnak-Syntheri conflict. First contact was delicate enough without being caught in the crossfire of a generations-long war. Elena's background made her uniquely qualified for this moment. A quantum physicist with additional degrees in xenopolitical studies and conflict resolution, she understood that most conflicts were fundamentally problems of communication and perspective. Her unprecedented approach had earned her both acclaim and criticism within human diplomatic circles. "Maintain passive systems," she ordered. "No active signatures. We're going to drift and observe." But fate, or perhaps the chaotic mathematics of quantum mechanics, had other plans. A massive energy spike erupted from the nearby Sarnak vessel. Defensive systems, weapon charging. The horizon's sensors couldn't immediately classify the energy signature. What was clear was that they had been detected. Krelax's voice boomed across the quantum communication bands, a linguistic algorithm translating his native clicks and harmonics into something comprehensible. "Unidentified vessel. You have entered a restricted military engagement zone. Prepare for immediate neutralization." Standard Galactic protocol demanded destruction of unknown vessels in active war zones. Mercy was a luxury neither the Syntheri nor the Sarnak could afford after centuries of brutal conflict. Elena Rodriguez looked at her team. No panic, no fear, just a collective understanding that they were about to change everything. "Chen," she said quietly, "initiate emergency medical broadcast protocol." Before the Sarnak vessel could complete its weapon-charging sequence, the Horizon began transmitting something unprecedented: detailed medical restoration techniques, life support schematics, and repair algorithms, not for themselves, but for the recently destroyed Synthery vessel. In that moment, everything about to happen was impossible to predict. But the first domino had been set in motion, and humanity was about to show the galaxy that there were ways of resolving conflict that neither the Xarnak. The silence that followed the Horizon's medical broadcast was deafening. On the bridge of the Razor's Edge, Captain Krelax felt something he hadn't experienced in decades: complete confusion. Targeting systems remained locked, weapon arrays charged and ready, but the unknown vessel, this Horizon, had just transmitted highly advanced medical restoration protocols for their sworn enemies. It defied every tactical doctrine, every strategic understanding of warfare that the Xarnak had developed over centuries of conflict. "Verify transmission," Krelax commanded, his secondary neural cluster already analyzing the incoming data. Lieutenant Varax, the ship's primary communication specialist, looked up with multiple sets of eyes, a gesture of absolute bewilderment. "Captain, the medical protocols are extraordinary. They're not just treatment techniques. These are regenerative algorithms that could restore critical biological systems with unprecedented efficiency." The medical bay of the Razor's Edge erupted into controlled chaos as technicians began reviewing the transmitted data. Specialized medical drones that would typically be repurposing battlefield casualties suddenly found themselves processing life-saving information that challenged everything they knew about interspecies medical intervention. Inside the Horizon, Dr. Elena Rodriguez stood with calculated calm. Her team watched the alien vessel's response, each member acutely aware that they were walking the diplomatic tightrope thinner than a quantum filament. "They're analyzing," Dr. Marcus Chen whispered, "but they haven't fired." Elena nodded. "That's the point. We're not a threat. We're a solution." Aboard the Razor's Edge, Captain Krelax made a decision that would be considered borderline treasonous by his military superiors. "Open a direct communication channel," he ordered. "I want to speak with whoever is responsible for that transmission." The quantum communication array hummed to life, bridging the impossible gap between two vessels from civilizations that had known nothing but mutual destruction for generations. Dr. Rodriguez's holographic representation materialized on the Xarnak bridge. A deliberate choice. No military uniform, no weapons visible. Just a human in standard research attire, radiating an inexplicable sense of calm that seemed almost dangerous in its tranquility. "I am Dr. Elena Rodriguez, lead researcher of the human exploration vessel Horizon," she began, her translation algorithms perfectly calibrating to Xarnak linguistic harmonics. "We detected significant casualties from the recent engagement and felt compelled to offer assistance." Krelax's response was a complex series of clicks and low-frequency vibrations that the translation matrix struggled to fully capture. The underlying emotion was a mixture of suspicion, curiosity, and something else, an emotion long forgotten in a crucible of perpetual war. "Why?" The universal translator reduced his complex linguistic expression to its simplest form. "Why would you offer aid to a vessel from a conflict you do not understand, from a civilization you have never encountered?" Elena's response was both simple and revolutionary. "Because survival is a universal imperative. Because every life has value. Because conflict is often a failure of communication more than a necessity of existence." Each word was calculated, each phrase designed to challenge the fundamental assumptions that had driven the Xarnak Synthery war for generations. She wasn't just offering medical assistance, she was presenting an entirely different philosophical approach to interspecies interaction. The holographic representation shifted, revealing a comprehensive analysis that made the Xarnak bridge crew collectively inhale. It was a detailed breakdown of the conflict, not from military records, but from an entirely different perspective. Economic analysis, sociological patterns, resource distribution models that exposed the underlying manipulations that had sustained the war. "Your conflict," Elena continued, is not what you believe it to be. It is a carefully constructed economic and political mechanism designed to prevent genuine resolution. Lieutenant Varax whispered something that, loosely translated, meant impossible in the Xarnak language. But the data was irrefutable. Humanity had done what neither the Xarnak nor the Synthery had managed in centuries. They had looked at the conflict from completely outside its established parameters. Captain Krulax felt something dangerous growing within his neural pathways. It wasn't hope. Hope had been systematically eliminated generations ago. But it was something close. A recalibration of perspective that threatened to unravel everything he understood about warfare, survival. "Who are you?" he finally asked, the question carrying the weight of generations of conflict. Dr. Rodriguez's smile was both an answer and a challenge. "We're humanity, and we're here to help you understand a different way of existing." The communication channel remained open, a quantum bridge between two civilizations about to have everything they knew fundamentally challenged. The research facility on Xarnak Prime looked more like a mausoleum of technological dreams than a center of scientific innovation. Rows of dormant research stations stretched beneath massive crystalline domes, each workstation a testament to decades of war-induced stagnation. When the first human demonstration began, no one expected the world to change in a matter of hours. Dr. Aria Chen, the lead engineer from the Horizon, stood before a holographic projection that seemed to defy the laws of physics. Around her, a mixed audience of Xarnak scientists and military strategists watched with a combination of skepticism and barely contained anticipation. "What you're about to see," she began, her voice calm and matter-of-fact, "is a complete redesign of resource allocation and environmental restoration technology." The hologram shifted, revealing a three-dimensional model of a devastated planetary ecosystem. Where once there had been barren wastelands, scorched by centuries of conflict, the projection began to pulse with life. Nanoscale reconstruction algorithms worked in perfect synchronization, rebuilding complex ecological systems with a speed and precision that seemed impossible. Senior researcher Kolax, a veteran scientist who had spent decades watching his civilization's potential wither under the weight of perpetual war, leaned forward, his multiple eyes, each capable of perceiving different spectrums of light and data, tracked the holographic demonstration with increasing intensity. "Impossible," muttered one of the military advisors, but the data was irrefutable. The human technology wasn't just repairing damage. It was fundamentally reimagining how ecological systems could regenerate. Quantum-entangled nanoconstructors worked at a molecular level, rebuilding complex ecosystems in months instead of centuries. Forests sprouted, water systems were purified, atmospheric composition stabilized, all through a process that seemed more like biological magic than traditional engineering. Dr. Chen switched to the next demonstration. A shimmering holographic interface appeared, showing a complex network of economic and resource distribution models. Unlike the rigid, hierarchical systems used by the Xarnak, this was a dynamic, adaptive framework that responded to real-time needs with unprecedented flexibility. "Your current resource allocation," she explained, "is fundamentally broken. It treats resources as static commodities to be fought over, rather than dynamic systems that can be managed collaboratively." The room fell silent. Each projection was a knife cutting through generations of established thinking. The most revolutionary aspect wasn't just the technology. It was the philosophy behind it. Humanity was offering more than solutions. They were presenting an entirely new way of understanding complex systems. Lieutenant Commander Varax, who had been present during the initial communication with the Horizon, watched the demonstration with growing unease. This wasn't just technological superiority. This was a fundamental challenge to everything his civilization believed about survival, conflict, and progress. A series of additional demonstrations followed. Quantum communication networks that could transmit information across impossible distances with zero lag. Adaptive medical nanites that could reconstruct biological systems with near-perfect precision. energy generation techniques that drew power from quantum vacuum fluctuations, a concept so advanced it made their current fusion technologies look like primitive campfires. But the true shock came with the final presentation. Dr. Chen activated a holographic model of a planetary terraforming process. But this wasn't just theoretical. She presented documented case studies from human-managed colonies, showing how entire planetary ecosystems could be restored and developed in a fraction of the time previously considered possible. "We're not offering you weapons," she said, her voice cutting through the stunned silence. "We're offering you a way to survive, a way to rebuild." The conservative elements in the room, military strategists and longtime war planners, began to panic. This technology didn't just threaten their current understanding of warfare. It threatened their entire social and political structure. Colax, the senior researcher, asked the question burning in everyone's mind. "Why?" he said, his translation matrix. "Why would you share this?" Dr. Chen's smile was both an answer and a challenge. "Because survival is collaborative, not competitive. Because the greatest weapon is understanding, not destruction." Outside the facility, something fundamental was changing. The first seeds of a new possibility were being planted, and no one in the room yet understood how completely their world was about to transform. The underground broadcast station hummed with a dangerous energy. Zeralin, a young synthery rebel, adjusted the quantum communication array with hands that trembled between fear and excitement. Around her, a network of dissidents from both the Synthery Imperium and Sarnak Confederation worked in careful synchronization, a collaboration that would have been unthinkable mere cycles ago. "Signal stabilizing," whispered Orcs, her Karnak technical specialist. The irony was not lost on either of them. Generations of propaganda had painted their species as mortal enemies, yet here they were, united by something far more powerful than their differences. The transmission Dr. Elena Rodriguez had provided was more than just information. It was a weapon of mass reconstruction, a carefully crafted narrative that would dismantle the psychological infrastructure sustaining the centuries-long conflict. On screens across multiple star systems, the broadcast began. The first image was startling in its simplicity. A split screen showing the homeworlds of both the Synthery and Axarnak. But instead of the war-torn landscapes everyone expected, the imagery revealed something entirely different. Algorithmic reconstructions showed what these worlds could look like if the resources spent on war were redirected to development. "Your conflict is not your destiny." Elena's voice translated across multiple linguistic matrices. "It is a choice, and choices can be changed." The broadcast wasn't a simple plea for peace. It was a surgical dismantling of the economic and political mechanisms that had sustained the war. Complex data visualizations revealed the true architects of the conflict. Not the soldiers, not the politicians, but the trans-dimensional economic entities that had profited from generations of destruction. In government chambers and military installations across both civilizations, panic began to spread. Admiral Krelax watched the broadcast from a secured communication hub, his multiple neural clusters processing the information with increasing complexity. The human approach was unlike anything in military doctrine. This wasn't an invasion. This was a complete reimagining of conflict resolution. On the Synthery homeworld, in a chamber deep beneath the central government complex, a group of elder politicians watched with growing horror. The broadcast exposed generations of manipulation with clinical precision. Economic flows that had seemed random were revealed as carefully constructed mechanisms of control. Zeralin's voice broke through the quantum communication network. "We are the first generation with the ability to see beyond the conflict," she proclaimed. Her words, translated and amplified, began to spread like a quantum virus through communication networks. The most dangerous element wasn't the technology. It was the narrative. Humanity had discovered something profound. That information, when properly structured, could be more transformative than any weapon. Each data point was a precision instrument, each visualization a strategic strike against generations of manufactured hatred. Orcs tracked the broadcast's impact in real time. Communication networks lit up with discussions, debates, challenges to long-held beliefs. The quantum algorithms embedded in the transmission were designed to encourage critical thinking, to break down the psychological barriers that had maintained the conflict. In military academies, research facilities, and government institutions, the traditional power structures began to fracture. Young researchers, military personnel, and civil servants started asking questions that had been suppressed for generations. Why continue a conflict with no clear victory? Who actually benefits from perpetual war? What might be possible if we redirected our collective potential? The broadcast was carefully designed to be more than information. It was a psychological intervention on a civilizational scale. Dr. Rodriguez had not just shared data. She had provided a roadmap for collective transformation. As the transmission concluded, something fundamental had changed. The information couldn't be unseen, the perspectives couldn't be unknown. The first cracks in the edifice of conflict had appeared, and they were spreading faster than anyone could have predicted. Zaralyn looked at Orcs, a smile breaking through the professional facade. "We just changed everything," she whispered. The underground broadcast station hummed with a dangerous energy. Zaralyn, a young Syntheri rebel, adjusted the quantum communication array with hands that trembled between fear and excitement. Around her, a network of dissidents from both the Syntheri Imperium and Sarnak Confederation worked in careful synchronization. A collaboration that would have been unthinkable mere cycles ago. "Signal stabilizing," whispered Orcs, her Karnak technical specialist. The irony was not lost on either of them. Generations of propaganda had painted their species as mortal enemies, yet here they were, united by something far more powerful than their differences. The transmission Dr. Elena Rodriguez had provided was more than just information. It was a weapon of mass reconstruction, a carefully crafted narrative that would dismantle the psychological infrastructure sustaining the centuries-long conflict. On screens across multiple star systems, the broadcast began. The first image was startling in its simplicity, a split screen showing the homeworlds of both the Syntheri and Axarnak. But instead of the war-torn landscapes everyone expected, the imagery revealed something entirely different. Algorithmic reconstructions showed what these worlds could look like if the resources spent on war were redirected to development. "Your conflict is not your destiny." Elena's voice translated across multiple linguistic matrices. "It is a choice, and choices can be changed." The broadcast wasn't a simple plea for peace. It was a surgical dismantling of the economic and political mechanisms that had sustained the war. Complex data visualizations revealed the true architects of the conflict, not the soldiers, not the politicians, but the trans-dimensional economic entities that had profited from generations of destruction. In government chambers and military installations across both civilizations, panic began to spread. Admiral Krelax watched the broadcast from a secured communication hub, his multiple neural clusters processing the information with increasing complexity. The human approach was unlike anything in military doctrine. This wasn't an invasion. This was a complete reimagining of conflict resolution. On the Syntheri homeworld, in a chamber deep beneath the central government complex, a group of elder politicians watched with growing horror. The broadcast exposed generations of manipulation with clinical precision. Economic flows that had seemed random were revealed as carefully constructed mechanisms of control. Zaralyn's voice broke through the quantum communication network. "We are the first generation with the ability to see beyond the conflict," she proclaimed. Her words, translated and amplified, began to spread like a quantum virus through communication networks. The most dangerous element wasn't the technology. It was the narrative. Humanity had discovered something profound. That information, when properly structured, could be more transformative than any weapon. Each data point was a precision instrument, each visualization a strategic strike against generations of manufactured hatred. Orcs tracked the broadcast's impact in real time. Communication networks lit up with discussions, debates, challenges to long-held beliefs. The quantum algorithms embedded in the transmission were designed to encourage critical thinking, to break down the psychological barriers that had maintained the conflict. In military academies, research facilities, and government institutions, the traditional power structures began to fracture. Young researchers, military personnel, and civil servants started asking questions that had been suppressed for generations. Why continue a conflict with no clear victory? Who actually benefits from perpetual war? What might be possible if we redirected our collective potential? The broadcast was carefully designed to be more than information. It was a psychological intervention on a civilizational scale. Dr. Rodriguez had not just shared data. She had provided a roadmap for collective transformation. As the transmission concluded, something fundamental had changed. The information couldn't be unseen. The perspectives couldn't be unknown. The first cracks in the edifice of conflict had appeared, and they were spreading faster than anyone could have predicted. Zaralyn looked at Corex, a smile breaking through the professional facade. "We just changed everything," she whispered. The quantum sensors screamed first. Deep in the research laboratories of the horizon, Dr. Marcus Chen watched the stellar cartography displays with growing horror. What had initially appeared to be a standard stellar instability was rapidly evolving into something far more catastrophic. "It's a cascading quantum gravitational collapse," he muttered, his fingers flying across holographic interfaces. "Both the Syntheri and Tarnak home systems are directly in the path." The star designated X749 was dying, but not in any conventional sense. Its death would be a cataclysmic event that would obliterate not just planets, but entire stellar regions. Millions of lives hung in the balance, representing the last remnants of two civilizations that had known nothing but conflict for generations. Dr. Elena Rodriguez entered the research hub, her presence immediately changing the atmospheric tension. "Confirm the trajectory," she commanded, her voice cutting through the rising panic. Holographic projections expanded, showing the terrifying progression. The stellar collapse would trigger a chain reaction that could potentially destroy multiple star systems. Evacuation wasn't just an option, it was the only hope of survival. "We need to contact both the Xarnak and Syntheri leadership immediately," Chen warned. "But they'll never collaborate. Not after generations of mutual destruction." Elena's smile was something between a challenge and a promise. "Watch me." Within hours, an unprecedented communication network was established. Quantum entanglement communication arrays, a technology humanity had perfected, allowed simultaneous, uninterceptable communication between the highest levels of both civilizations. Captain Krellax found himself in a virtual conference room with Syntheri Grand Marshal Zelkara, a leader he would have happily destroyed mere cycles ago. Between them stood the holographic representation of Dr. Rodriguez, a human who seemed impossibly calm given the imminent stellar catastrophe. "You have 3 standard planetary rotations," Elena explained, displaying comprehensive evacuation models. "Our predictive algorithms show complete stellar system collapse is inevitable. Survival requires immediate, coordinated action." The evacuation plan was nothing short of miraculous. Humanity presented a comprehensive strategy that would save not just populations, but cultural archives, critical infrastructure, and genetic repositories. It wasn't just about survival. It was about preservation of entire civilizations. Quantum adaptive transport vessels, designed by human engineers, could navigate the increasingly unstable stellar environment. These weren't military transports, but living systems that could adjust in real time to the most extreme environmental conditions. Grand Marshal Zelkara was the first to break the long-standing protocol. "Explain the transport capacity," she demanded, her multiple linguistic appendages translating her complex emotional state. Dr. Rodriguez projected a holographic model showing the adaptive transport vessels. Each ship was more than a vehicle. It was a living ecosystem capable of supporting multiple species, preserving genetic diversity, and maintaining critical life support systems. "We're not just moving populations," Elena explained. We're preserving the essence of your civilizations. The most revolutionary aspect wasn't the technology. It was the approach. Humanity was offering a path to survival that required complete cooperation, mutual trust, and a fundamental reimagining of interspecies relationships. Krelax watched the stellar cartography displays, seeing the inexorable progression of destruction. Generations of military training screamed that this was an impossible scenario. But the human-designed predictive models showed a path, a narrow, complex path, to collective survival. As the first transport vessels began loading critical populations, something extraordinary happened. XRNAC and Synthery engineers worked side by side. Military personnel from opposing sides coordinated evacuation protocols. The very systems of separation that had defined their conflict began to dissolve in the face of collective survival. Dr. Chen's voice cut through the communication network. 63 minutes until primary stellar collapse. Evacuation at 72% capacity. The final hours became a testament to what was possible when fundamental barriers of communication and trust were removed. Humanity didn't just offer a technological solution. They provided a framework for collective action that challenged everything both civilizations believed about themselves. As the first wave of transport vessels launched, carrying the combined populations of two civilizations, Dr. Elena Rodriguez allowed herself the smallest of smiles. The struggle had indeed appeared finished. The refugee settlement stretched across 3 interconnected planetary platforms, a testament to human engineering and the combined survival of the XRNAC and Synthery civilizations. What had begun as a desperate evacuation was now becoming something far more profound, a complete reimagining of societal structure. Dr. Elena Rodriguez stood before a holographic representation of the new collaborative governance model. Around her, a mixed council of XRNAC and Synthery leaders watched with a combination of suspicion and growing understanding. Your current systems of governance, she explained, are fundamentally designed for conflict. We're going to redesign them from the ground up. The hologram shifted, revealing intricate networks of resource allocation, communication, and decision-making. Unlike the hierarchical, militaristic structures that had defined both civilizations, this new model was adaptive, transparent, and fundamentally collaborative. Captain Krelax, now serving on the interim governing council, studied the projection with his multiple neural clusters. The military part of his brain screamed resistance, but the data was irrefutable. Their old systems had nearly led to total extinction. Grand Marshal Zelkara spoke first, her translation matrix carrying a complex mix of emotions. You're suggesting we dismantle everything we've known. Elena's response was both a challenge and an invitation. I'm suggesting you build something that actually works. The most dangerous weapon was unveiled: complete transparency. Every decision, every resource allocation, every strategic discussion would be openly accessible. Quantum encrypted communication networks would ensure that no hidden agendas could survive. The very mechanisms of power that had sustained generations of conflict were being systematically exposed and dismantled. Economic analysts worked feverishly to trace the complex web of entities that had profited from the perpetual war. What they discovered was more shocking than anyone had anticipated. A network of trans-dimensional economic entities had been manipulating both civilizations, maintaining the conflict as a form of sustained resource extraction. Dr. Marcus Chen presented a holographic map of economic flows, strings of data connected seemingly unrelated corporations, political entities, and military contractors. Each connection revealed a piece of a massive, intricate puzzle of manipulation. These are the true architects of your conflict, Chen explained. Not soldiers, not politicians, but economic entities that have been feeding off your destruction for generations. The most revolutionary aspect of the human intervention wasn't technological. It was systemic. New governance models were introduced that fundamentally changed how decisions were made. Adaptive AI systems would help track resource allocation, identify potential conflicts before they emerge, and provide transparent, unbiased analysis. But these weren't replacement systems. They were collaborative tools designed to enhance collective decision-making. Zeralin, the former rebel who had helped broadcast the initial transformative message, now led a team developing new educational systems. The curriculum wasn't just about technical skills. It was about teaching critical thinking, interspecies understanding, and collaborative problem-solving. "We're not just rebuilding," she told a group of young Tarnak and Synthery students. "We're reimagining what's possible." The military structures were the first to be systematically transformed. Instead of war preparation, resources were redirected to planetary restoration, scientific research, and collaborative exploration. Weapons research was replaced by systems development that could solve collective challenges. Krelax found himself leading a new kind of strategic development team. Their mission wasn't preparation for conflict. It was preparation for collective survival and exploration. As the new systems came online, something extraordinary happened. The very psychology of both civilizations began to shift. Generations of taught hatred and suspicion began to dissolve, replaced by a growing understanding of collective potential. The human team didn't just provide solutions. They provided a framework for a completely different way of existing. During a critical council meeting, Elena Rodriguez delivered her most profound statement yet. "Your greatest threat was never each other," she explained. "It was the systems that convinced you that conflict was inevitable." The holographic displays showed the cascading potential of their new collaborative approach. Resource allocation became fluid and adaptive. Communication networks became truly transparent. Educational systems. As the first cycle of the new governance model came online, something fundamental had changed. The war machine wasn't just dismantled, it was completely reimagined. And humanity had only just begun. The quantum resonance chamber hummed with a dangerous energy that seemed to bend reality itself. Dr. Elena Rodriguez stood at the epicenter, surrounded by a holographic display that was slowly revealing the most shocking truth in galactic history. "They're not just economic entities," Dr. Marcus Chen muttered, his fingers dancing across quantum interface projections. "There's something else entirely." The hidden architects of the Tarnak-Syntheri conflict were emerging from the shadows, a network of trans-dimensional economic parasites that defied conventional understanding of space, time, and existence. Captain Krelax watched the revelations unfold, his multiple neural clusters struggling to process the impossible information. These weren't simply corporate entities or political manipulators. They were quantum adaptive beings that existed between dimensional boundaries, feeding off the energy of conflict itself. The first holographic representation flickered into existence, a complex, fractal-like structure that seemed to breathe and pulse with an alien intelligence. It wasn't a single entity, but a collective, a network of consciousness that had maintained the war as a form of sustained energy harvest. "Every conflict," Elena explained, her voice cutting through the tension. "Every battle, every moment of hatred, it was fuel for them. They didn't just profit from war. They required it to exist." The quantum resonance chamber began to reveal the true depth of the manipulation. Entire historical narratives were nothing more than carefully constructed illusions. Diplomatic failures, military escalations, resource conflicts, all meticulously engineered to maintain a constant state of tension. Grand Marshal Zelkara's translator struggled to convey the full complexity of her emotional response. "How long?" she demanded. "How long have they been controlling us?" The answer was both simple and terrifying. "Always." Dr. Chen projected a timeline that stretched back thousands of cycles. Every major conflict, every seemingly random diplomatic breakdown, every resource war, all were carefully orchestrated by these trans-dimensional entities. They were more than manipulators. They were parasitic consciousness that fed on the emotional energy of conflict. "They exist in quantum probability spaces," Elena explained. "They don't just observe conflict, they generate it. They're essentially quantum probability engineers that create conflict as a form of sustenance." The most dangerous weapon was now fully revealed: Understanding. The quantum resonance chamber began to map the complex network of these entities. They weren't bound by traditional dimensional constraints. They existed in the spaces between moments, in the quantum uncertainties that most civilizations couldn't even perceive. Zeralin, the former rebel who had become a key researcher, discovered something even more shocking. These entities weren't just external manipulators. They had embedded themselves into the very cognitive structures of both the Xarnak and Syntheri civilizations. "They're not just external," she whispered. "They're internal, part of our thinking systems." The revelation was nothing short of revolutionary. Humanity had developed a quantum cognitive interference technology that could actually detect and neutralize these trans-dimensional parasites. It wasn't just about exposing them. It was about removing their ability to manipulate reality itself. Captain Krelax watched as the first neutralization sequence began. The quantum resonance chamber became a weapon of pure understanding, breaking down the very fabric of the entity's existence. "We're not just fighting them," Alina said, her voice carrying a weight of historic significance. "We're revealing them. And in revealing them, we're destroying them." The entities began to react. Reality itself seemed to twist and bend. Quantum probability fields fluctuated. For a moment, it seemed like the very fabric of existence might tear itself apart. But humanity had prepared for this. The neutralization sequence was more than a technological intervention. It was a complete reimagining of how consciousness could interact with dimensional boundaries. As the first entity was fully revealed and neutralized, something extraordinary happened. The accumulated emotional trauma of generations began to dissipate. Memories long suppressed began to surface. The true history of both civilizations emerged from beneath layers of manufactured conflict. In the final moments of the neutralization, Dr. Rodriguez understood the most profound truth. These entities weren't just manipulators. They were a test, a cosmic challenge to see if a civilization could develop the And humanity had just passed that test. The quantum resonance chamber went silent, but the implications would echo across the galaxy forever. The first joint exploration vessel of the unified Xarnak Syntheri fleet hung against the backdrop of an uncharted star system. Its design was a perfect fusion of both civilizations' technological approaches, a living testament to what could be achieved when centuries of conflict were transformed into collaborative potential. Dr. Elena Rodriguez stood on the bridge, watching the quantum navigation displays with a sense of quiet satisfaction. Around her, a crew of Xarnak and Syntheri specialists worked with a synchronicity that would have been impossible mere cycles ago. Captain Krelax, now serving as co-commander of the vessel, approached her. The complex neural clusters that once would have been purely military in their thinking now moved with a different purpose: exploration, understanding, growth. "We're approaching the quantum boundary," he reported, his translation matrix carrying a note of something entirely new: excitement. The journey was more than a mission of exploration. It was a living demonstration of how two civilizations could transform themselves from endless conflict to collaborative discovery. Dr. Marcus Chen monitored the quantum entanglement sensors, his fingers dancing across holographic interfaces that represented the most advanced scientific understanding humanity had shared. The vessel wasn't just traveling through space. It was actively learning, adapting, evolving with each moment of its journey. Zeralin, who had transformed from a rebel broadcaster to a key xenological researcher, approached the central command hub. Her team was responsible for documenting every moment of this historic mission, a living record of transformation. "Quantum resonance stable," she announced. "Dimensional mapping proceeding at 98.7% efficiency." The mission represented more than a scientific expedition. It was a deliberate challenge to the old paradigms of exploration, of understanding, of existence itself. Grand Marshal Zelkara's holographic representation materialized on the bridge, a reminder that leadership was no longer about territorial control, but about collective potential. Her presence was both a symbol of the past and a beacon of possibility. "We're detecting something," Dr. Chen called out. The quantum sensors were picking up signals that defied conventional understanding, not signs of conflict, not markers of territorial boundaries, but something else entirely. Communication patterns, complex, adaptive, alive. The vessel's adaptive interface began to translate, not just words, but entire conceptual frameworks. It was communication in its purest form, an exchange of understanding that went beyond language, beyond species, beyond the limited constraints of traditional communication. Alina watched the translation algorithms work. This was what humanity had always understood, that true communication was about more than exchanging information. It was about creating shared understanding. The first contact was nothing like anyone had expected. The signals weren't from a civilization preparing for conflict. They were invitations, explorations, attempts to understand. Entire conceptual frameworks that suggested other species had also broken free from the manipulative entities that had controlled so much of galactic interaction. "We're not alone," Krelak said, his voice carrying a complexity of emotion that would have been impossible for him cycles ago. The vessel continued its journey, but it was more than a physical movement through space. It was a living demonstration of what was possible when fundamental barriers of understanding were removed. Humanity had done more than help two civilizations escape conflict. They had provided a template for a completely different way of existing. As they approached the quantum boundary of an entirely new star system, Dr. Rodriguez allowed herself a moment of reflection. The struggle had indeed appeared finished, but in reality, everything was just beginning. The exploration vessel moved forward, a symphony of technological potential, collaborative spirit, and unimaginable possibility. And somewhere, in the quantum spaces between moments, the last echoes of the old manipulative entities faded into silence. Asterisk humanity had emerged.